This has all turned out to be much more bizarre and interesting than I thought it would be. So I want to talk about the most interesting thing that I learned as a part of Colossal Bioscience's direwolf announcement. And we're going to keep using air quotes around direwolf forever, but you know what I'm talking about. I understand the way that attention works in the world that we exist in. Of course I do. Otherwise I wouldn't have this job. And so I know that there's a difference between the most interesting thing and the most interesting thing. So like the most interesting thing would be recreating direwolves, this extinct animal, these giant wolves that we know from fantasy novels. So that's the most interesting thing that could possibly be. And so you sometimes have to go for that story. But then there's also the most interesting thing that actually is, which is, let's admit it, more interesting. And the most interesting thing that actually is in relation to Colossal's work on canids, on dog things, wolves and coyotes and stuff, is the Red Wolf Project. So what you gotta know is that, like, given the technology of 5 years ago, red wolves were probably gonna go extinct. This is a kind of wolf that was, for a while, extinct in the wild. There are currently some in the wild, but they are all descended from a captive breeding program, and I'm gonna tell you about right now. So here's a map of their former range. They used to be all over the eastern and southern US. They're not as big as gray wolves. They're bigger than coyotes, but unlike coyotes, they actually hunted in packs, which is kind of what maybe makes a wolf different from a coyote, though this is not a taxonomic distinction. Red wolves and coyotes only split off like 200,000 years ago. They have much different ranges, much different prey animals, which is why they got exterminated, because they were big enough to take down a lot of livestock. So we actually intentionally killed the red wolves, which is what we did to gray wolves as well. Not for meat, not just encroaching on their habitat. Like, we went and killed as many as we could so that they wouldn't eat livestock animals or be scary to us. By the 1970s, they were on the verge of extinction. There were less than 100 of them in the wild. And from like the mid-1970s, they trapped basically as many as they could, and they brought them to a captive breeding center where they have been bred since then. But the thing about that is only 12 of the 14 ended up having their genetic information involved in the red wolf population. 2 of them never bred. And 12 basically probably isn't enough to create a sustainable population because of a really interesting thing that I didn't understand until I started looking into this. That amount of genetic information probably would be enough, but every time you breed wolves together, you lose some genetic information. So like when my wife and I had a child, he got 50% of my genes and 50% of her genes. And if that was the only child we had, which it's going to be, then 50% of my alleles will never show up again, and 50% of hers will never show up again. But those alleles are present in other humans around. But if that's not the case, if I have unique alleles because there's only 12 humans left, then those will be lost forever and we'll never get them back. In each breeding event, you lose more. And you don't lose like more and more. You lose a little less each time, but you are losing more. Was that confusing? Like the pie piece that you're losing is smaller, but it is in addition to the existing pie pieces you have already lost. And so over time, genes become more and more representative in that population, and you have more opportunities for like a bad gene to happen twice on the chromosome. And so you have a bad gene and a bad gene that's the identical bad gene right next to each other, and you might end up in a situation where that is the case for every single wolf in the population. That is, as far as I can tell, more or less destined to happen with the existing population of red wolves. So we have this species that used to be like all over the US. They went down to 12 breeding individuals. That's now like over 200, but those 200 wolves are pretty inbred, and they're getting more inbred every time we breed them, which we have been doing since the 1980s. This animal, people will argue this point, but this animal is basically destined for extinction. In a way, it's already extinct because it was extinct in the wild, and so all of the sort of knowledge, the cultural knowledge that those wolves has been lost. And so now we're in a conversation about what extinction is, which also reminds me that this video is brought to you by a new project that we want to do at Complexly called Endlings. We want to do it as part of the Bizarre Beasts channel, which is going to be a show about what's called an endling, which is the name for the last member of a species before it goes extinct. So there's this very like weird, intense time where you know that there will be no more because there's only one individual, there's no one to breed with. And so we're going to tell the stories of those animals, which is going to be like a window into so much cool stuff. I think this is super fascinating. It's a really great window into ecology, into like human-animal relations, into extinction, into biology, into biotechnology, all of this stuff. It's really cool, and there's a newsletter you can sign up for right now if you are interested in it. You will only ever get information about this specific topic, which clearly you are interested in, and as we get closer to launching that channel, maybe there will be ways that you can help. So sign up for that, and also, I'm going to have a conversation with the producer of that channel, Sarah Suda, who you may know from Bizarre Beasts, about what we're going to do with Endlings, why we want to do it, and other stuff at the end of this, which is why this video is so long. So lots of people think that with current technology and just captive breeding that like we could bring back the red wolf. I'm like on the fence about that. I think there's a good enough chance that that is impossible that we need to be exploring other options, or just accepting that there's like a really high chance that red wolves will never come back. And now importantly, this is an animal for whom the niche still exists. Now it's a lot more closed down than it used to be, but mostly they didn't die because of habitat loss. They died because we killed them. It's an animal that can help recreate a habitat that used to exist that no longer does. It's an animal that we have here now. We have the genetic information potentially, and that's the other thing, because there are red wolf alleles out there that are not in the captive breeding population, particularly in a wild population of wolves or dogs or something that we don't know what they are. And I love this. We know that they are largely red wolf, and they are also some portion coyote. And it seems likely that red wolves and coyotes interbred a lot. It seems likely that this happens a lot with dogs. Dogs are particularly interbreedy and like genomically flexible, or phenotypically flexible, at least. We know that dogs are phenotypically flexible because we've seen pugs. That thing is descended from a gray wolf. So that doesn't seem right. And that, my friends, is phenotypic flexibility. But then also, there is a substantial portion of the genome of these wolves who do exist in the wild right now that like doesn't appear to be from anywhere we know of. And that could mean a few different things. It could mean that like the red wolves that we have just aren't representative of the original red wolf genome, which would make sense. Because we don't have very much of it. And so maybe that unknown genome is at least part red wolf. Could be also part coyote, and we just like don't have all of the information there. But it seems like a substantial portion of this genome is from an extinct dog species that we don't know about. It's different enough from red wolves and coyotes that we think a fair hunk of this genome is basically the equivalent of our, like my Neanderthal DNA. So I have Neanderthal DNA because my ancestors interbred with Neanderthals, and we know about that, and like there's a hunk of that DNA in me. We think that that's the situation for these dogs that live in the wild that are majority red wolf. They have a substantial hunk of an extinct canid that we have no fossil evidence of. What? I love that. It's like a new frontier in like as a kind of archaeology, like genomic archaeology. You can look at genomes and be like, there's stuff there that's not from anything. Now, very excellently, this population of mostly red wolf canids on Galveston Island, we called them ghost wolves, which I love. That gives me goosebumps saying it. But the real ghost wolf is in their DNA. And there might be enough of that stuff in the living population of these red wolves that we could pull out, and I don't know if we want to do this, but we could pull out alleles and be like, this codes for this and this codes for this. And it's not going to be like a substantial hunk of each individual, but maybe across all the individuals, we could find enough of this weird stuff and do real genomic archaeology where we put those genes or those changes into like a wolf embryo, and then that is given birth to by a surrogate, and then we know what that animal would look like. Now, we wouldn't know much about its behavior or the ecosystem that it lived inside of or whatever, but it would, like, that's very weird to be like, instead of finding a skull of an extinct animal, you create the skull of the extinct animal by basically like cloning it back up. Nobody's talking about doing this, by the way. But for clarity, you could absolutely do it with Neanderthals. Like, this is something that we probably could do now. Obviously, we can't and should not. Do not ever think that I am advocating for something because I say that it's possible. Lots of terrible things are possible. And I think that this would be a terrible thing to do, but you could, in the same way they made direwolves, make Neanderthals. You could make Neanderthal proxies, where you take genes from Neanderthals that we think are like some of the big differentiators. And for clarity, Neanderthals and humans, I think, are... When was our last common ancestor? 500,000 years ago? 500,000 years ago. So we are more closely related than direwolves and gray wolves, but also have those interbreeding events just like direwolves and gray wolves apparently do. Now that that paper is out and I've seen it, I'm more or less convinced, by the way. I mean, as a layperson, like, I'm not doing the peer review on this paper. I know nothing about this. Like, if you could say we can create a direwolf, you also have to admit that we could create a Neanderthal. So that's the current world. But like the question of whether we can revive an extinct species that is not in the fossil record is separate from the reality of the cool thing that we are probably going to do, which is to use the genetic information from these wild ghost wolves to enhance and enrich the genetic information that has been lost from the captive breeding population, because they are not a captive breeding population and they have been able to continue thriving in the wild. Not thriving, but existing in the wild. And this isn't like a Colossal could do this. It's a Colossal is working on this. So they have worked to clone some of those ghost wolves so that we don't lose that genetic information. So the thing about having a baby is that you lose some genetic information each time. And if you have a bunch of them, you don't lose as much. Like if you have 2 babies, instead of losing 50% from each parent, you only lose 25% from each parent. And wolves have a bunch of babies, and hopefully enough of those babies survive. But when you clone a wolf, you get 100% of those alleles out. And so if like a wolf is old and is not going to breed, you could still get those alleles if you clone that wolf. Or multiple wolves and have them be babies now who are going to have their whole life to do some breeding. But then also you can do what Colossal did with the direwolf project, which is take specific alleles that may have been lost from that population and reintroduce it, or reintroduce it specifically to like individual babies to be like, these are the problems that these babies are going to have because these are the spots on their genome where they have issues. And then like CRISPR those spots to make them viable, fertile offspring, which maybe otherwise you would not have gotten because the population is so inbred. Getting lost alleles back into the population is how you fight against inbreeding and how you make it possible for red wolves to be a species that you could put back into its environment to refill the niche that has been abandoned. If you had asked me before I knew about this Colossal Biosciences work, I would have said red wolves are more likely than not to be destined for extinction. And this, for me, flips that and says that they are now more likely than not to not go extinct. But as you can tell, this is all super complicated. And like what a species even is weird, and particularly weird in these dog species of North America and I think other places that just have a lot of interbreeding. And so you end up in a situation where the ecological definition of a species starts to make more sense than the taxonomic one, because the taxonomy is so complex with all these interbreeding events. The ecological definition then is, okay, but what role do they fill? What's the behavioral aspect? Not the genetic aspect, but the behavioral and ecological aspect of the species. What prey items do they feed on? Do they hunt in packs? How big is their range? And the difference between like a coyote, which comes together to have like a little family unit and then become solitary, that's your coyote. And a red wolf is something that's quite similar to a coyote, but has larger prey items, larger range, and hunts in packs. And like that's not really something I was familiar with. And so then you have to ask, well, if the ecological definition of a species is viable and useful, now I understand that like it's not just that I've been convinced, it's also that there's a lot of the experts in the field, like lots of experts in the field, recognize the usefulness of an ecological or behavioral definition of a species. Then what does that mean for Colossal's claim that they created a direwolf? And for me, it doesn't change the fact that I don't think they created a direwolf. But I want to have these conversations, and I have a person I'd like to have these conversations with who is the producer of the show that we want to make called Endlings, and also the producer of Bizarre Beasts, and my colleague for a long time, Sarah Suda. And so Sarah and I now are going to have that chat. Hello, Sarah.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm good. So tell everybody what you do at Complexly.
I am the producer for Eons, which we make with PBS, and the producer for Bizarre Beasts.
And also now the producer of Endlings, probably, hopefully.
Of Endlings.
If this happens. Yeah. I don't know if you know this, but the people at Colossal like reached out and they're like, you should interview our chief science officer. And I'm like, I guess I should. So I'm probably going to do that. So I will, I'm sure, rely on some of your expertise to help me with that conversation. Sure. Having looked at this, extinction is so complicated.
Yeah.
It seems like the simplest idea in the world. There are species, and that's the specific thing. And then if they don't exist anymore, that's extinct. Turns out I knew already that species were complicated, but that means that extinction is complicated.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, there's so many, like, what is a species? What is a distinct population? Like, it's semantics at certain levels, whether or not species are their own thing, or if they're all a complex of species, or and if one part of it goes extinct, if you isolated a larger population long enough, would you iteratively create the same thing again? Would that be the same? ship of Theseus at a certain point. Like, it's not yes, but no. Talking a little bit earlier about red wolves and red wolves interbreeding with coyotes. It's hard to know exactly. Well, I guess maybe the genetics could kind of tell us how often this would have happened in the past.
Yeah, but only the genetics of the individuals that we have,
But now, because of habitat changes and the way that coyotes especially, have moved into places where humans live, and so they have a different range than they used to. They're meeting up with red wolves way more often. They can produce viable offspring. And then also domestic dogs can get into that mix too. The question of purity of species is a really sticky kind of a weird thing too. Are you trying to preserve the thing that, like, on paper in the math genetically is the most close to what we had, or the thing that is viable and exists and maybe phenotypically, like, visually looks like the thing we're looking at? One of the big questions we want to talk about in the new series is what happens when a zoo becomes a museum, where it's here you can see what a rainforest used to look like.
Oh my God,
yeah. What did this whole tropic level, how did it work? How did this food web work? Like, when we get to the point where those are the things that we're having to preserve in jars, A, probably not sustainable forever.
No.
B, are you preserving it just so the knowledge is there? Are you preserving it in order to one day reinstate it? Is it just a historical function?
The thing that, like, I think we get stuck with from third grade is, like, the bad part about extinction is extinction. There's something to that, of course. Like, this loss, like, and, like, with, like, an example like the dodo, you, like, look at this thing and you're like, that's from a different freaking planet, Like, I feel like a lot of people haven't been brought out of that vision of conservation, that it's about, like, well, as long as we can keep 2 of these things around, we'll have done the job.
Sometimes it's very hard to know what they were doing. Like, what else did we lose? What else was lost on the island of Mauritius when the dodo went extinct? Like, what plants was it the only thing spreading seeds of? What parasites did it have that didn't exist on anything else?
Save those parasites.
Who knows, man? Yeah. Do we have a moral obligation to save everything? Like, if we could.
Sarah, do we have a moral obligation to save everything?
I mean, if we have the power to, maybe we should.
I don't know that we do. If I could extinct the ticks.
That's another thing. There's diseases. There's things like guinea worms, like big parasites that affect people.
Yeah.
Where
human-specific parasites, absolutely happy to extinct those.
We may be able to destroy them. But there are also other living beings. Do we keep a colony of guinea worms somewhere?
That's a fascinating point. So how are you feeling about this conversation I got myself into with regards to direwolves?
I saw that. I have not watched, but they did a response video.
They did, I watched it being like, oh God, I have to watch this now, and I'm terrified.
Oh no.
Yeah.
I hope that it is getting to enough people to get them thinking about what is the marketing line that they're selling versus what has actually transpired and why they want to sell the marketing line. Like, what do they get out of it? But what could be the eventual conclusions to all of this? What is the end game?
Yeah. I did have this thought that, like, did we just create, like, if we created a species here, which I don't think we did, but if we created a species here, did we also create an endling? Like, are one of these 3 direwolves the last one? Because they say they don't want to breed them, and I'm like, okay, well, what did we do here? That's kind of a sad story ultimately. Then.
Yeah, and, like, I don't know if you know, genetics math is very weird. Like, it's hard, like, the percentage, how different something is from something else, because, like, people and chimpanzees, like, the percentages are very small.
Yeah, one of the things that they talked about in the response video to me is could you? So there's a bunch of predator species in Australia that are decimated by cane toads because they're poisonous and they eat the cane toads and then they die. But there's a bunch of South American species that, evolved along with cane toads and so are more resistant to cane toad toxin. And could we take that resistance gene and put it in the predators in Australia? Just like one gene, plop it in there, and then they will no longer be decimated by cane toads. And they have tried this, and they have indeed found that they can do this. And so instead of trying, because you can't breed a South American snake with an Australian snake and have it become resistant to cane toads, because you then have a totally different snake, and probably they wouldn't have fertile offspring anyway. But this way you can grab that one gene, put it in there, and this isn't. We could do this before Colossal's work, but with CRISPR, this stuff gets way easier, and understanding, how to do the surrogacy stuff and how to get the edits in there efficiently and how to get viable offspring. Well, you could, I'm like, oh yeah, that seems like a total 100% good. You got to do that a bunch of times though, because you have to do it to a breeding stock size of the population.
Yeah, and then that gets back to the purity thing.
It does. This, I think that
you only have GMO quolls out there, or Tasmanian devils, or whatever. It's the only ones that survived are the ones that we've filled with.
I mean, I am fine with that. Is there a reason I shouldn't be?
Without knowing XMRN or generations in the future, what that fiddling could potentially do, are there ramifications we don't know about because this is so early, that if the entire population has had that change done to it, did we doom the population X number of generations into the future?
What I have liked about this direwolf conversation is that we're talking about all of this stuff, which I think is very interesting, very important, and often not discussed. And I think that's part of what we why we wanted to do Endlings.
Oh,
is
yeah,
what excites you about this new show?
So many dang things. That's so exciting. This whole project started, Darcy and I had this whole little conversation about what would be fun, weird, being able to get into more philosophical questions about ecology, evolutionary biology in general, but extinction more specifically, that we can't quite get into in Bizarre Beasts or in Eons. I have my MFA in Science and Natural History Filmmaking. My thesis was about sort of environmental defeatism, what happens when you tell people the total truth about stuff and they just decide, well, that's too far gone, and they do nothing about it. Part of that was, did not end up using the interview in the finished film, but I interviewed people at a zoo and was just what happens if this is a museum at some point? Why keep these critters and keep looking after them and trying to breed them if their entire ecosystem is gone?
There's no niche that's gone.
They only would exist here. What is the reason? What is the point? The big question about, do animals need to have benefits to humans in order for us to let them continue to exist? There's so much about oh, you want funding for this conservation? You better have some kind of, maybe there'll be medicine in it. Or something.
All the medicines of the rainforest, which is not true. It's just why are we talking about it to some extent?
That maybe can't be the only reason.
Yeah, but the thing about the zoo as the museum really does hit that hard, because at that point it's are we only keeping these animals around to feel better about ourselves? So that we don't have to face the reality of what we did. And that's that is a thing that I'm think we should be that we're going to be very focused on in this show, and that I feel I should be very focused on in these conversations about wolf stuff is, animals don't go extinct because we didn't have de-extinction tools. They go extinct because they're we kill them for food or to protect our livestock, or we encroach on their habitat so much that their niche goes away, or we gobble up all their food items or something, or there's invasive species. There's a bunch of different reasons why it happens, but all of those things are harder. And we've run into this with red wolves, where we brought red wolves back into the wild, their population was increasing, but we couldn't culturally have rules against hunting them. And so they got hunted. So there's these 200 of these things in the wild, maybe 100 of them in the wild at one point, and now they're down to 30 or 20 because people hunt them. And I'm and living in Montana, we are aware that there is an understandable culture of fear of large predators, both for people's livelihoods and their livestock and because people sometimes get predated on. Which is a real thing. I keep learning this lesson over and over again, that culture is harder than technology.
Oh, yeah. We've been talking a lot about passenger pigeons. The things blackened the skies. They're so big. There is a big question of, would there be the modern America that we have if we still had millions of birds blackening the sky throughout the East Coast and like Midwest multiple times a year? Like, how would our current systems of factory farming and air travel and everything else, how would those have developed if we had the pre-industrial levels of passenger pigeons? Or like, we still have bison, but we only have a very small number of them. How would our interstate highway system work if we had thousands of
just car-sized animals in the road?
I'm sorry. I am going to be 5 hours later than I thought I would because I have to wait for the migration to go through.
Oh, yeah. I'd love to look into this and see what stats we can find. But in places like the US and a lot of Europe, there's actually like more forest coming back than being harvested for the first time, since humans got here. Or maybe, since humans got here. It has become easier to leave some space for non-human use. As we have the capacity, we have the space, because like now we, in parts of the world don't have to worry about like survival, and in situations where you have to worry about survival, those are the worst ones for conservation. And so like part of the story of conservation is also the story of humans taking care of each other.
Oh yeah. 100%. Understanding why things are happening in a place, like why do the people in that area feel the need to do X? Yeah. And if their government, if the way that their social systems and everything work out can't solve X, like you can't go in and try to fix the ecology part of it, because the people need to live. Like you can't stop them from, like, they have a farm. You can't tell them don't farm.
Yeah, stop eating food. Get rid of your livelihood. I know that this is your land and that you have been using it to feed your family and neighbors, but no, not anymore.
Yeah, no.
And I mean, you do still have that problem even in affluent places, like red wolves are a problem for this very reason, and gray wolves as well, and bison, where people feel
a bison will run through a fence.
Yeah. Nothing stops a bison. Well, this is such an interesting topic to be taking on. So where can we find out more about it?
We're going to start doing a newsletter.
Yes.
To tell people like what's going to happen. Yeah. Oh my gosh, it's like
we have to make sure that this actually works. Like I don't know. Yeah. We're more cautious than we once were.
Yeah, we're ideating. We're getting things together. We're working stuff out. Feeling out how this is going to work. And you can sign up for the newsletter at complexly.com/endlings.
Which is spelled how you expect it to be spelled.
Yes.
Yeah, endlings.
And maybe you could put it on screen.
I bet it's on screen, and I bet it's in the description. So.
Yeah.
Awesome. Sarah, thank you for coming to hang out with me for a little bit on a Friday afternoon. Yeah. It's always good to see you.
Very fun. Yeah, it's good seeing you.
Am I in next week to film Bizarre Beasts? I think I am.
Yes, but I am not going to be there.
You're almost
because I'm going to be filming a thing for Eons.
Oh, cool.
Way out in the sticks somewhere.
Oh, field trip.
Field trip.
Nice.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for giving us a little window behind the scenes of how things work.
Yeah. It's fun.
All right, thanks everybody for sticking around to the end of the video. If you want to check out that newsletter, there is a link in the description. And if you've lasted this long, I would assume 100% of you are interested in that. It will only be a newsletter in relationship to Endlings, so you can sign up, link in the description. And I'm really excited to get to work making that new show. And I'm also excited to continue thinking about this and having this conversation, because ultimately, the most interesting thing, we created this extinct species, is not true, but like it got a lot of people thinking about this. And there is like some really like actual most interesting things that are real. And so I'm glad to be talking about them with cool people. And I want to keep doing it while I also keep doing all the other stuff that I'm doing, because I can't stop. And I won't. Well, I might for a little while sometimes, because let's be honest with ourselves.